Today, we have the privilege of speaking with a true legend in track and field, a three-time Olympian, Commonwealth Games gold medalist, and a world-class coach who has mentored some of the sport's greatest athletes. Robert Weir competed in 3 consecutive Olympic Games for Great Britain in discus and hammer throw, securing his place among the best in the world. He also brought home gold and bronze medals from the Commonwealth Games and dominated throwing events for over 2 decades. But this impact didn't stop there. After retiring from competition, Robert became a renowned coach at Stanford University, the University of Oregon, and the University of Missouri, among other places as well, guiding multiple athletes to NCAA championships and Olympic podiums, including Olympic gold medalist Adam Nelson. His ability to develop talent, build mental resilience, and transition athletes from great to elite has made him one of the most respected minds in track and field. And on a personal note, I am deeply honored to call him a former coach from my days at Stanford, a wise mentor, and a forever friend. The lessons he has shared about performance, preparation, and life have stayed with me long beyond my time as an athlete. So today, we're diving into the mental side of elite performance, the transition from athlete to coach, and what it really takes to sustain excellence over a lifetime. So let's get into it. And Robert Weir, welcome to the Mindscape Report with Dr. Wilson.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the first question I have for you is all about that elite performance mindset. So as a 3-time Olympian, what mental strategies helped you to maintain focus and resilience on the world stage? And how, if at all, did that mindset evolve throughout your career as an athlete?
Well, that's a very detailed answer to come, but I'll start off by saying that for me and from my own personal experiences with athletes, it's been the desire that they've had to achieve. Without that desire, you can still be successful, but not as successful as you want to be. Because the desire, what it's done, has created for you a passion, an intensity, a work ethic, a goal-setting mindset that allows you to raise your own levels of performances because you're still trying to achieve a very high goal. And in order to achieve that high goal, you've taken the baby steps, you've taken the bigger steps, you've taken all of those things, but you still are not satisfied until you get the result you're looking for. So to me, it begins with a desire. And I don't know where it came from in my life, but there was this sudden desire to become an Olympic athlete. I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it came. Within my brothers and my family, I just had this desire to become an Olympic athlete. And so from young age, that became a focus for me. And throughout my high school and college days, that was the one goal. And I remember being recruited to America at SMU. And I remember training. And at that time, I was well below the standard of Olympic Games, but I had a winter's training and I worked and trained. And I didn't think it was that much work or that much training. But when I look back at it and look at the training with some of the young athletes today, the ones that want it in terms of being successful, achieving high goals, are prepared to work hard. The ones that don't, the work becomes too much, the training becomes too much. They have other options. And those things are fine. But to have expectations of wanting to be an Olympic athlete while at the same time wanting to have some other choice or some other career, then the Olympics is very demanding. It is something that you have to make some sacrifices for. And your own personal Olympics can be science. It can be becoming a teacher, it can be becoming an engineer. And that is fine. But once you clearly define what your Olympics are and what's important to you, then your desire will take over for that choice in terms of your career. Mine just happened to be in the world of sports. And I was fortunate enough to recognize or to realize after my freshman year, or during my freshman year in college, that I already had achieved the Olympic standard in the hammer throw. And so it took another year and I'd achieved the Olympic standard in the discus. So all of a sudden my mindset changed because I realized now that I could actually become an Olympian. It became a real thing in my mind. And as a result of it becoming a real thing, then more work, more training, but because the desire was strong to actually make it. Now that I know that I could make it, the next step was to actually make it. And so that is one of the things that motivated me. I found something that I was really passionate about. I found something I could really focus on. And I just had this inner belief that I could actually do it. And every step of the way, these miniature goals, these miniature steps that I've taken led to the bigger steps. But they were all a confirmation, reinforcing the fact that this is something that can be done. In the very early days, you really don't have much of an idea of what it is that you can or cannot do. But what you do have in your mindset, at least, is the fact that there's a possibility somewhere far down the road that you can, on your journey, achieve and stop at that destination called the Olympic Games. And so you start doing things emotionally, you start doing things physically, you start doing things, finding people who have achieved those goals and learning those lessons from them, and then incorporate it into your own psyche, into your own mental attitude to help you take the steps towards becoming somebody at the quality or of a world-class athlete or an Olympic Games or whatever the sport or whatever the subject that you've chosen. And for me, that's where it started. It was just started with desire. Some people have the ability to do multiple things. And you meet those people and you think, wow, if only I could do that. But then the truth is that you can, but they just have the desire in more than one area. You just have the desire in one area compared to somebody else.
Yeah, I love that. I agree about, you talked about just it being in you, wanting to do that desire. You don't even know necessarily where it comes from, like that idea. I don't know if you remember, but in those days, and this show's not about me, so we're not going to get into why this is not the outcome. But in those days, I used to sign all my emails "Future Olympian" because in my mind, that's what was happening. Like it was going to be, that's where it was going, and just to keep that was my signature back then. Before I even knew what a signature really was. But to have that reminder. So I do believe that for some people, that spirit just comes to them and they're driven to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. But another thing that comes out of what you said for me was just the idea of having that resilience, because there are things that are going to come up and there'll be different things for different athletes. Some athletes are very healthy naturally. They don't have a lot of battles with injury versus others that may, for example. But there's things that can come up that are really going to test how strong is your resolve to actually get this thing done and how much you really want it. So is there anything that you can think of that was like that for you, that's where that spirit, that drive to get this done really came into play? Because for somebody else, for other people you did know, that was the end, but for you, you kept going. Was there anything?
Well, one of the things I did, and I didn't realize I was doing it, was I found people who were Olympian. At home in the United Kingdom, track and field, or athletics as we call it, is very important. And so part of the community program was a track club, so to speak. And so my mom decided that one of the ways to keep us safe was to take us to Boy Scouts or some other club, whether it be swimming or something like that. But we ended up choosing athletics because it was sort of had a social component to it, in that after you finish training, you could have a cup of tea and you can meet with your friends and they can talk about training and talk about things. And so when I first went down the club, the track club, there's not much help, but at the same time, I was around people and you could see others who were really good. And so I looked at them and said, oh, so that's what it takes. So that's the level of training. And I'd still go about the training that I did at the time, but I realized I wanted more. And so putting yourself in and around people who are where you want to be, they will look at you and give you information. And sometimes the information they give you, you don't realize it, but just being around them, you can absorb some of the things that they're doing to get to a certain level and then to step up and improve and to help you take the step ups to other levels and higher levels. So eventually you achieve your goal, or maybe in some cases exceed it. So at this track club, I started to meet some of the better coaches. And at the same time, I was developing in the sport of hammer throwing or hammer. And then throwing the hammer, one weekend, they had these trials. And I didn't know if I was any good or not. So I went along to one of these trials and I said, have you thrown before? I said, no, not really. I said, well, here's the hammer, throw this or try this. And they gave me some instructions and I threw it. And then these two guys were looking at each other. And it wasn't a lot of people, but there was a handful of people. So that handful alone had selected itself to be somebody that was really wanting to pursue this career further. So there's a handful, and they looked around and they said, do you have a coach? I said, well, no. And they both offered to coach me.
Wow.
And I looked at one coach and I looked at the other coach and I realized that coach had been to the Olympics and he done all things. So automatically I chose him. So you see the connections, that you found people who could help you. And the funniest thing is that people always say is that if you ask people who are very successful, how they became successful, they'll tell you, and I understand the reason why they tell you, because most people are not prepared to take the steps that they've taken to achieve what they've achieved.
Yeah.
And so they simply tell you, this is what I did, and this is how much time it took. And once you realize how much time it takes, some people say, well, I don't have that time. Or I'd rather do something else than do something with my time, because there's no guarantees that you are going to become successful when you go.
Which
But
shows that they didn't really want it in the first place.
right, it's in one sense. And in another sense, what is to recognize the fact is that the more steps you take towards the goal, the closer you are to achieving it. When you stop, that goal is still there. Those steps still remain, but you've now redirected your focus somewhere else. So that goal that you had ends once you end it. So even though it's a risk you might not make it, taking those steps increases your chance and your opportunities. A long time ago, I was in investments, and I suppose you still are because you're retiring and all that stuff. But there was they talked about this man called Warren Buffett. He said he's invited people to come and do what he does. So then he said, well, what do you do? He says, well, he reads up to 5 hours a day every day. And it's always related to the investments. And I said, most people, when I tell them that, are not prepared to do that. If you are prepared to do that, there is an opportunity for somebody there. He said, but most people won't do that. And it's the same thing. You tell somebody what you want to achieve, and you tell them the top end of what you had to do to get there. And most people look at where they are, and they ought to consider the steps to achieving those goals, but instead they say things along the lines of, "No, this is not possible. I don't think I can do that," and then they leave it, and then they leave it like that. It's an incredible journey that people have, but it's just crazy because you look at it and you realize that is so insurmountable. But every time you take a step, you're also chipping away at what you thought was impossible. And it becomes and over time it becomes very possible.
I love how that highlights just the mindset. Well, a couple of things. The mindset is so important because yes, if you've already told yourself that it's too hard, then it's not going to happen. You've made it too hard for yourself now, as opposed to taking those small steps to try and see what happens. But I also like how you talked about the importance of not just mentors, but role models, and how you actively sought them out, no matter what it is that you're trying to be successful in. Like you have to, if they're not readily available, then if you're really about doing this thing, you have to seek them out, and you never know what you'll learn. Just like you said, just absorbing from being around these people who are doing what you want to do, and discernment too about that. Like how you had the two coaches that approached you, you knew which one because you were paying attention, had already done what you want to do. So if you're picking somebody to guide you, that's the person to go with.
Yeah, the one that was most successful was the obvious choice,
Exactly.
And I remember even in the movies, you see snippets of things like that. There was a movie about this guy who became a banker, and he was a little kid, but he was outside the bank shining people's shoes, so he could overhear the conversation, things that were said, and then you learned that information, and over time he became the owner of a bank and very wealthy in other areas. That was his goal, that was his desire, and he started to do those things. After you just talked about role models, it just clicked because I said, "Oh, I watched this movie, and that's why I like the movie because this guy turned himself into somebody successful, and he found his own way of getting there." I tell you, another person that has been incredible was Michael Carter, a shot putter from the United States. I went to SMU, and we're closest friends, but his national high school record has a chance to be broken by somebody eventually, but it stood for over 45 years now.
Wow. 45 years.
Yeah. And as a result of which, I talked to him about his training, and I talked to him about the things he did. This training he did, he said, "Robert, I don't know what made me do it. I went to the library, I got a book on shot putting. I said, I drew a circle in his backyard. He had the book open on the page, what they were doing. He had the shot putting in his hand, the circle set up, and he'd turn the page, look at what they were doing, and then he'd throw." So I said, "Where did that come from?" He said, "I have no idea where this came from." He said, "I have absolutely no idea. But what I do know is that something inside me just said, this is what I do to throw." And he said, and then he'd watch other people's technique and said, "What if I took this part of the technique out and did this? Because it would make me quicker, or it'd make a difference in his throw." And lo and behold, 81 feet in the shot put, which has stood for ages. And so there's a possibility that at some point somebody will get it, they've gotten close to it, but not close enough to break it.
Wow.
But
that's amazing.
It's one of the all-time greatest performances, especially including in high school. But it just goes to show the mindset. It goes to show the desire and the goal that he set for himself to achieve a high-level performance. And he has no idea where it came from. All he knew is that this is what he felt he needed to do in order to achieve.
Awesome.
You know, it's incredible because you wonder how people develop or get notions or ideas that, you know, what is it that makes you feel that you can make a difference? What is it that makes you feel that you can make a change? What is it that makes you feel that you can solve a problem that others have looked at and say, I haven't been able to solve? It's something somewhere inside of you that there's a connection that you're able to make. And once you've made that connection, you'd start taking the steps to achieving that goal of solving the problem, being the athlete, being the academic, being the actor, whatever that goal is. But something somewhere in there, there's a connection that was made that said that made you believe that you could do it. And that was the other thing, is there's an inner belief that you can actually do this, right?
Yes.
At some level. I want to point out to you is that I heard that you were actually an Olympian because at one of the Olympic Games, you're one of the team doctors. Is that not true?
No, not yet. And I do hope that that will happen sometime soon. But I'll tell
Yeah.
you this. I mean, it's flattering that they said that, but no, not yet. I do work with the Olympic Committee and the athletes. I'm one of the physicians that works with them here. They refer them to me at the registry. I haven't traveled with them to the games yet.
Not
I
yet.
say yet.
So you
But
see,
I remember what you said before, though. I don't know if you remember years ago, last time I saw you, years ago. You said we talked about the journey, and again, where mine ended with respect to competition. But you said, when all of this is said and done, you're going to be an Olympian multiple times over, and I
yes,
still believe that's true.
yes,
I still believe it.
because everybody's path, you can't really predict what the path is. I said, but the things that you're doing, like if you look, even if you look at your factors now, you're
Mhm,
now involved in the Olympic Committee. You're now involved with young men or young women coming to see for you to help them, as
mhm,
you know, as a physician. So you're already in contact with people who
mhm.
have been where you're going to go.
Yes,
So you know,
yes,
so those
that's
factors still apply. I mean, there's another young man that I've been very fortunate to meet, and he said ever since he was a child, he wanted to become an NFL player.
hmm
And, you know, he wanted to play in the NFL. I said, where did that come from? He says he doesn't know. He says, but that's what he wanted to do. And everything he did in his from high school into college was all about becoming an NFL player. And over time, he got better and better and better. And he ended up being a first round draft pick one year to the Kansas City Chiefs. And he was
Oh wow!
just missed out on getting his third Super Bowl ring.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. Well, really, you say missed out, but there's a lopsided score. But the point is,
Wow!
and he just told me, and then when I watch him and we talk and friends, the thing he does, his organization, the methods he takes, the way he goes about his professional career, absolutely, you can see it and realize this, the way that he approached things was somewhere ingrained in him years ago.
Yes,
You know, he'd say to me, oh, I've got to go watch film, I've got to go do this, I've got to do that. His trainings, the recovery, preparation, everything. I don't know all the details, obviously, but the point is that this is an exceptional young man who has set a high goal and taken the very steps, even including the setbacks to achieve his goal, and he's made his goal.
that's
You know,
awesome.
it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome, and I am sure that it also feels good to see the work that you've done. I mean, you've already been to that level, to the height of what you were doing before in terms of performing, competing.
yeah.
But to see that you're able to take that and turn around to help other people reach that goal as well. I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing. I imagine that it also gives you great joy to see people like this,
Hmm.
doing what they're doing now. Yeah. Let me ask you about this. This is another
Yeah.
piece that comes up a lot with
And
athletes
she said, "I'm so
transitioning
sorry."
out of
She's on,
sport.
and she was in this
But
short
you
course
had a
swimming
shift
competition,
from
and she
athlete
remember
to
saying how much
coach.
she
So
hated
I
me.
want to know, what's the
And yeah,
biggest
here's the
mental
race door.
shift that you had to make when you're moving from being the competitive athlete to coaching elite athletes? And for athletes that are navigating career transitions in general, what advice do you have for them?
Well, let's start off with the advice.
Okay.
The advice I would have for an athlete is at the peak of your career and your success, at the peak, the next stage of the peak is the other side of the peak where you come down from those high achieving moments, levels.
Yes.
It is at that time that you start to look for opportunities and a future.
Yes.
Because if you're very, very successful, people will come and present you choices. And then you can choose from being a TV presenter, sportscaster, head of a business, head of an organization, all of those things, if you're very successful. Also, once you set your mindset of achieving what you set out to achieve, it is in your own best interest to realize that you have to have a secondary goal. The
Hmm.
hardest part about that is finding that goal. What is it that you want to do now that you've achieved what you've achieved?
Yeah.
Because in some instances, you've seen the stories of people that they've achieved their goals and now they've had to retire. And as a result of the retirement, they're saying, my life is over. There's nothing more for me. And then tragically, I mean, their life is over from one way or the other. And then there've been others said, well, I knew that this was happening. And I started to take alternative plans and I started to develop this career, this business. Look at, there was a basketball player, not including Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal, they're superb.
Yeah.
They
Yes.
would be at the top of the top,
Yes.
right? But there's another basketball player, and he quietly started a business in the auto industry, and he branched out into other areas, and he's worth as much money, worth more money than his entire basketball career. But he knew methodically that he had at his peak, and he started looking for an additional career, and he found this as a career, and he became an entrepreneur. Turns out that he was an entrepreneur, and he's made his career something fantastic. He's blossomed, and what he's done is it's such an example for others to follow.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
know, I think that first of all, I say that to people frequently, to athletes frequently. I think that that's an important piece of advice that I'm glad that they're getting from multiple places. But yes, at the peak is a time.
Yes.
And it's not the main reason that I've said is because just what you said, that's when people are interested in you. That's when you have access to all of these people and all of these things that you can do and opportunities. And the access is not the same and the attention is not the same once you're not performing your best anymore. As a matter of fact, once you start declining, it will literally close doors that were open before, and
Right.
that's just how it works. But the other thing that I thought about when you were talking about it that I haven't necessarily said to people, but another thing that's important about pursuing those opportunities at that time is the reframe in the mind. If you're pursuing it when you're doing well, then that's you being smart. That's you being strategic. Nobody's going to be an athlete for their entire life or making money from being an athlete their entire life just because our bodies weren't meant to do that type of activity forever. But if you're doing it at that point in time, now this is a choice that you're making.
Yes.
The choice that you're choosing from what's left of what people are willing to give you later on. And then it doesn't feel like, oh, this is a backup plan because things aren't going well, or oh, I'm about to lose my ability to do this sport entirely. So now I have to figure something out. No, now this is something that you're just choosing to add on, and it's another success story. And I think that makes a huge difference when you are done with your sport. You're still going to have not necessarily issues most of the time, I would think so, but you're still going to have to deal with like the transition and what that feels like and the loss
Mhm.
of that role and that identity. But when you already have that set up, it makes whatever you're working on apart from that feel so much different than it does if you don't even come to that till after you're done with your sport. Yeah.
Yes. One of the things that happens sometimes is, on the way up, when you meet people on the way up, some of the people that meet are genuine. The problem you have is figuring out which one's genuine, which one's not genuine. And
Hmm.
the other problem you have is knowing that you've hit your peak or still believing you can do more. And maybe, your career's
Yeah.
sliding and you still think you're up there. And so all of a sudden, because you didn't realize what your peak was, you start going downhill and people start abandoning you too. So in some ways, as you develop and as you get better as an athlete, you do need a team of people around you because some of them will come around you, but you need to be able to find out who are the real people that have your best interest because those are the ones that will help you in your career. Those are the ones that will support you, like your coach. Your coach will
Mhm.
help you. Your coach and the people that, and once the coach is helping you and supporting you, now they're going to be very protective of you. If you're looking to do something or someone's looking to do something else, they're going to do the scrutinizing for you. They're going to help you to make sure you can transition out of your career into another career. They
Yeah.
won't know exactly how to do it. And if they're not really interested in helping you in that connection, helping you second your career, then it's not an obligation that they have, but at the same time, they are associated with your success
Yeah.
and therefore they don't want to be associated with your failures, so they'll do what they can to help you.
That's
That's
true.
been my experience. I can't
Yeah.
speak for every coach, I can't
Hmm.
speak for everybody, but I can only speak for my experience. So what you're looking at really is an opportunity of sorts that one, if you recognize your peak and you recognize what you're good at, then as your career is starting to go down, you can find other opportunities. The
Hmm.
ones that are really great and could not, for whatever reason, the most of those other opportunities are the ones now that have a bit of an issue or a bit of a struggle here or there. But help
Yeah.
is still there for them. It's just recognizing that they need help in getting that help. In my case, the transition from coaching was when I was younger, and this is really interesting. I always thought that I might be a teacher, and coaching is teaching.
It is.
one of the ways is that through teaching, you meet people, you learn from them, and they learn from you. And I've met a student, and she was quite remarkable. She transferred, and this is a case in point for what we're talking about now specifically. She transferred from one university to Missouri, and she was just unassuming, really, really, really nice. And she wanted to be on, and I recruited her, and she ended up being on the track team. She also was going to law school. She graduated early and was going to law school. So while she was doing track and field, she was doing law school. And I would look at, and this is just, she just happens to be this really wonderful person. And to give you an example of how wonderful she was, so when she came to Missouri, I started working with her. I'd say, I'll do this, do that in training. She did those things in training. But in the same time, in the same breath, she was paying attention to me. So she saw that I had a phone, and the phone's windshield was cracked. And both because it's just a phone, I'll get to it later. I've never gotten to it. So then one day she goes, Coach, can I see your phone for a second? No, sure. I'll look at my phone. She gave her phone and she sits down and she peels back takes the cover off, and she puts on a completely clear label on one label. I'm like, where did that come from? But what I recognized was that I didn't recognize at the time, but what I understood was what I was doing was helping her perform better. And I didn't, but that's my job.
Yeah.
There's nothing more. But she just felt made a decision that she was going to show some level of appreciation. And she's about to graduate from law school now, and we're friends. I think we'll be friends for a long, long time.
That's awesome.
And her boyfriend is actually the guy I was talking to you about earlier.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, they'll be successful.
But they're wonderful people. Like,
yeah.
She will talk to me, spend time, and give me advice. But she still loves athletics. She still loves track and field. She's going to complete her courses for law school, and she's going to take the bar. And the other part of her career will take over, because at some point she's realizing, she told me this, there's going to be a breaking point where the lawyer part of her is going to take over, and the sporting side of her is going to come to an end. But while it's still available, she's doing her best to make the most of that world.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's
But you know
incredible.
what? I want to say, and I mean, because you were an athlete for a long time, there's a very significant, strong, especially when someone's spending a lot of time. And it happens more times when they're doing well, because then a lot of people are invested in spending time with them. But there's a strong bond between athletes and coaches.
Yes.
I think that for a lot of athletes, especially as they transition each level that you go up, and just like we said earlier, you have to figure out who to trust, because sometimes there are people there because they want to bask in the glory and share in the success. But,
Yes.
as we know, when that changes, a lot of times the people who aren't really there because they care, that can change. So one thing I want to say is, first, what she did for you, which was amazingly kind. I think she saw that not just that she was getting better working with you, but that you were pouring into her. And that makes a difference.
That's an interesting point, because I just think of it of doing my job. But strangely enough, now that you've mentioned it, I have some friends now that I had coached. There's a guy in New York called Dr. Brian Kelly, and he's the head of HCC or whatever in New York, head of the hospital. And I coached him when he was a student at Brown University, and we're friends to this day. There's another guy called Jerry Danini, and he lives in New Jersey or something, and he went to Brown University. I coached, and this is when I first started coaching, and we're still in touch today. He called me one day and said, Robert, whatever you need, just tell me. I said, well, what do you mean, whatever you need? I said, I'm just throwing it out there. Just whatever you need. If you ever need something, tell me. I said, right. I said, well, this isn't exactly the kind of thing that people just ring you up and say, whatever you need. So I said, I'm going to have to think about this.
Are there any rules or limitations here? Like,
no, any rules? There's got to be some rules. I said, okay, I'll think about it. It's been years. I'm still thinking about it. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to tell her. And so it turns out that Jerry said to me, he says, Robert, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for you. And I said to him, what did I do? Can I do it for me?
I can tell you don't realize, but you do it all the time. And
it's like
you're just doing your job, but this is you. That's the difference.
I said to him, I said, what is it that I've done? Can you tell? Because I'd like to know maybe I can do it for myself. I said, I hadn't spoken to him in a couple of years, and I called his house because one of his other teammates goes, Jerry, we'd love to hear from him. I'm not sure. So I called him up, and I talked to his wife, answered the phone. And she said, and she thought I called at a time when people call late at night when you're at home for business, and people get the answer like, "I'm busy, go away," or something like that. So I rang up this number. She said, "Well, who is this? What do you want?" I said, "Well, just wanted. My name's Robert Weir, and I just wanted to leave a message for Jerry." No, hold on. It went from absolutely nuts to hold on.
Your name.
Yeah, he's been talking about you forever. I've got to get him. So then I called him and he said, "Rob, you've got to promise me you're going to come visit me. Just promise me." I said, "All right, give me your word." I said, "Here's my word. I will visit you." And then I actually met, like a couple of months later, I actually met her. And she said, "Jerry talks about you nonstop." I said, "He does?" He says, and she says, "How long did you coach him?" I said, "Well, 1 year, maybe." She said, "A year? 1 year? What? You coached him for 1 year?" And he's there. I said, "I don't know." She couldn't believe. She,
Yeah.
she thought that I nurtured him since he was in, before high school, through high school into college and all. I only worked with him for 1 year. She couldn't believe it. I said, I just remember going, "A year? 1 year? You only coaching for you?" I never forget. That's all she would say. She couldn't believe it. I said, "I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I just worked with him." And Kaya Harris is like that towards me. She is, I have no idea. And that's the girl in law school. And
Yes,
she
I
is,
figured.
"Coach, let's go to dinner." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll take you to dinner." And she's finished. So I go to eat. "No, no, no, coach, you can't pay." Like, "What do you mean I can't pay?" "Well, you can pay, but you can't pay."
Well, and that's what it is when you have a good coach that truly cares.
But she achieved a lot, and there's so much more we were going to do.
Mhm,
Eligibility and NCAA's and all of those things came into play, and
mhm.
some technicality. And at the end of the day, we're friends. I mean, they said, "Coach, here's my keys to my house." I'm like, "What?" "Yeah, you're welcome anytime." Her boyfriend said the same thing to me. He says, "Coach, you're welcome here anytime." Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
Let me ask this question. When you're thinking about the athletes that were elite athletes or great athletes, rather, versus like the world class elite athletes,
Yes.
have there been any traits, especially if there's any like in terms of psychologically, like mental traits that you've observed that really separate those two groups? Or do you feel like at that point it's not that, it's other factors that come into play that really make that difference between being great and truly elite?
Well, I think those lines get thinner and thinner, all right?
As you put.
Because it becomes, sometimes it's a thousands or whatever, but those lines can be somewhat
Mhm.
blurred. But overall, and during the time of, working with athletes, they seem to have, the like-minded athletes seem to come together at some point. And I
Mhm.
don't know how it is. I mean, for example, Kaya is a high achieving person.
Mhm.
I mean, she walked onto the team and she made All American. She's done this or that. She's done all these other things, and she's just a high achieving person. Now, the level between where she is and where the elite levels are, it's just a matter of fine lines now. It's just a matter of time. And then the question becomes is how much time do you have to be able to achieve it? Her boyfriend, George Karlaftis, the other guy I told you about, he
Mhm.
was the guy that I mentioned earlier in just missing out on his third Super Bowl ring. But that guy, I mean, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what it is, but sometimes coaches and athletes have connections. And I
Yes.
mean, in terms of they realize that it may not look like the way that they wanted to do it, but the coach is telling you stuff to help you achieve. And then you go one or two levels up beyond what you thought you could do. And then you realize that the coach had given you advice that you didn't want to take in the first place. And to
Yeah.
me, that's the forming of a relationship,
Yeah.
right? Because
Mhm.
then that's a building a bond of trust, mutual respect. And so when you're talking to each other now about things, I don't like this, I don't like that, or whatever it is, here's the reason why you need to do this. Here's the reason why okay, I'll do that part. I'll do it. And then over time, the results remind them that even though they didn't want to do it, the advice they had allowed them to achieve more than what they thought was possible. It's quite something. Does that
Absolutely.
answer your question?
It does. And I agree that it's hard to decipher at that point anyway, because I think that's actually an excellent point to even that you made. The line is so thin that it's actually blurred at that point in time.
Yes.
So, and there's so many other factors that go into where people end up with their sport. So to
Yes.
even get to that level, I don't even think it's a lot of times it's not really a difference between the athletes. There's a difference in life and circumstances at some level, but it's not necessarily the mindset at that point in time
Right.
because on any given day, he could be one versus another. So yeah, it does
Yeah.
answer.
The other thing about it is that, like, I worked with Adam Nelson. Adam says, Robert, I don't think that what we're doing is really working best for me. I think I can do more somewhere else. And I said, well, Adam, I said, then maybe I was only part of your journey, not your entire journey. If your
Hmm.
journey now says that this is where it ends and your path takes you somewhere else, then you should then take it. I said, I'm not going to be upset. I said, I was here to help on your journey. If your journey or your final destination, I was only part of it, then it's part of it.
Hmm.
Just, you have to do what you think is right for you.
Yeah.
And we're still friends today. I mean, he moved on to what he thought was better and whatever. And I supported him. I said, no, Adam, don't. You've got to do what you think is right. I said, it doesn't matter about me. I've had my career. You're having your career. If
Hmm.
it means this, then do that. Because the whole point of him coming to me was to help him become successful. He became somewhat successful and got even more successful later on. Now, he got an Olympic silver medal working with me. So it wasn't exactly too bad. But
I think he did pretty well.
I think when he went on to get a gold medal and
Right.
so
That because you know I've encountered that when people are taking it's less on for skill, like for developing golf,
yeah,
or for other sports. Like they have different coaches, and like, it's not working for me anymore. And now it's this, and this person teaches them something else. And like, oh, I wish I had known that before. Like, no, you weren't ready to learn that before.
exactly.
What you did before is what you were ready for, and that
Exactly.
prepared you for this moment. So it definitely was not there's no wasting of time. Like that's what you needed at that time, and now you move on to something else. And the fact to let go and support him in moving on to that next level, that shows how much you really cared about his success. And I love how you put that parallel, like you're having your career, but he's having his.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're going to be like forever linked. They were linked for a time, and at
Mhm.
some point in time that might need to change, but it doesn't change your significance either.
No.
It's yes, and I know he knows that too.
Yeah, I mean, even the is a good. So it's not.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
like, and it's good friends through time. We've known each other a long time. So
yeah,
as far as I was concerned,
hmm,
I, the best thing you can do for an athlete is to help them on their journey. To
yeah,
me, that's the number one thing. Now, the journey may be long, very long or short, whatever
hmm,
you don't know. But whilst you're involved, the role that I choose to play is the one of support. And maybe with that kind of help and support, they're able to go on and achieve great things. But I'm the catalyst for that, maybe, or maybe my part wasn't really needed. There were a couple of swimmers that I'll tell you this story. This is really funny to me.
okay,
I was at Stanford, obviously, and I was minding my own business, working with the athletes and all this stuff. And the swimming coach came and said, Robert, can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure. We're in the same office suite. Of course you
yeah,
can talk to me. He says, all right, Robert, I would like to ask you a favor. I'm like, yeah, okay. What can I do for you? He says, well, I have two athletes that I want you to work with. Jenny Thompson and Dara Torres. I'm like, what? He says, yeah, I've got these two athletes I want you to work with. I said, well, first of all, I'm not working with any. I have no idea what they're doing or any of those things. I didn't even know who they were really, and
hmm,
and I didn't say that. I said, but I said, I'll tell you. I said, if they're already working with somebody, I can't interfere with what they're doing. He says, it's just not, it's just not right. He said, okay. The next day, Robert, that's all taken care of.
oh no,
The
somebody
next
got
day,
fired.
he came back. Okay, that's all taken care of. Like, did you work with them? I'm like, sure. So I started working with them. I talked to them, took a few notes, this and the other. And before you know it, I'm writing their training programs in swimming, and they're doing all this stuff. So what actually happened is that about a couple of months into this thing, right, all of a sudden I'm working with them, they're getting better. And one particular in December, Jenny Thompson turned to Richard Quick and says, "I hate that Robert Weir. I'm so sore. I'm so hurt." And they had these different seasons. One was called short course, and one was called long course. For swimming. And she said, "I'm so sore." And she was in this short course swimming competition with him. And he sat up and she remember saying how much she hated him, and then hated me. And he
Yes.
said, "Oh, yeah, here's the race going." He said, "Oh, she's not doing too badly." And so Richard, the race starts, and she's racing and she's swimming all stuff. And he said, "Oh, she's sore, but she's not swimming too badly." His other swimming colleague next to him hits him and said, "Not doing too badly. She's on world record pace." You
Oh wow. I bet she didn't hate you after that.
no, she was a lot nicer to me after that.
Yeah.
She ended up breaking that world record, and I don't know how
Wow.
many Olympic gold medals she has.
Oh
But
my goodness.
but she's a anesthesiologist in
Mhm.
Maine, something. But she
Oh.
went to Stanford, and then Dara Torres, her personality is much more outgoing and all that
Mhm.
stuff. And Dara's a wonderful person there.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were swimmers, and I said, Coach, you've had, your crown jewels, right, Jenny and Dara. I said, and you're asking me to work with them. I said, now why is that? Of all the people you could ask,
Yeah.
you could have anybody, but yet you specifically asked me to work. Yeah, I said, why is that? He looked at me and says, Robert, don't think I didn't do my homework. Don't think I didn't. I said, I looked you up. I looked at your background. I knew this about you. And he said, but more importantly, I watched you, how you worked with those kids that you in track and field.
Mm.
I watched how you worked with them and watched how you developed them, watched how they've gotten better. And I watched, your interactions and relations. I said, that's the reason why I picked you. And I was shocked,
Yep.
you know? So
Yep.
it's sort of, what is that? You scratch your head and you think, I'm doing what I think I should do. It turns out what I
Yeah.
think I should do was actually exactly what I needed to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
both of those women went on to win gold medals, and Derry went on to swim other Olympics and other medals and all the stuff in as a career. But it was quite funny. But Richard Quick was the swim coach, and at the time, and he asked me if I would. I said, like, you could have anybody, and you've chosen me, so that's quite something.
Well, the cream always rises to the top, and translatable skills. You might have been doing it for track and for football before, but
Yes.
you had the skill set, and clearly it works across sports. And
Yes.
you already have the talent to look at the athlete and see what they need to get them where they have to go. So yeah.
It's really interesting because I don't really think of myself as having a skill set. I think more just doing my part to contribute. But over time, you do accumulate skills. You just
Hmm.
don't recognize them as skills because you do them all the time. And because you do them all the time, you don't think they're skills. You just think, well, this is just a regular everyday routine. I mean, I can imagine a surgeon, and you think he's got to do all these things, and to him, it's just routine. He just goes through and does a procedure, set him up, and does the work that's needed.
But I think that that's part of what.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm saying the surgeon is so far above and beyond what I do as a coach that even the most intricate, difficult things, it's a routine for them that they've learned
Yeah,
and acquired over time. And like some of the things I do, I've learned and acquired at a much, much lower level, but you've acquired them over time.
I'm going to disagree with you about this whole lower level thing and much far beyond. I completely, 1,000% on the record, disagree with that statement. Even being a physician, no, it's just different. It's a different area, but it's still important, and you're still making a huge impact on people's lives. And I don't think what I was going to say before is just that it's not. You're right, and I get caught up doing this too. When you're used to doing something, not just the fact that you do it over and over again, but when it's just natural to you, like that's just your
Mm.
gift. You don't see it as something unique or special and or different. And sometimes you do need other people to kind of point out like how this is different because you only know what you're doing and you're in your head. But that difference. And that makes a difference when you have that, and I'll call it a gift.
Yeah,
When you have that gift for what you're doing. And that's part of what makes the difference between someone who may work hard
yeah.
and want something but not have the gift getting someplace versus someone who has the gift and then also has the right mental state and the ethic, the work ethic to take it to another level. And I do think that maybe not once you get up to the highest echelons, but before you get there, I think that makes a huge difference in people's trajectory, no matter what we're talking about in terms of what field it is that they're in. But I have a question about mental health in sports. How do you feel over the years, or have you noticed a difference? How do you feel the conversation about mental health in sports has changed? And when you're working with the athletes that you work with, do you work with them to try to develop like that psychological side, or for you coming at to it as a coach, do you kind of just say like the people who are there who are having awareness about that, we can work on these things because they already have it? How is that? It's two different questions. So how has the landscape changed with respect to mental health in sports? And then what's your approach for dealing with or not dealing with the psychological aspects of training athletes?
The landscape for mental health has changed, excuse me, significantly. It has been ongoing, at least in the sport of track and field. It was an ongoing issue for many.
Mm,
Everything from eating disorders to body
mhm,
shaming to
mhm,
doing or saying things that you thought were innocent and not recognizing or realizing the impact your words would have on others, even in the sense of a form of bullying from some of the things people say and thinking it's just funny. It is funny because you are not that person being targeted. And so the mental health issue, I think for many, it was something that people just didn't really understand. And now it's been brought to the surface that more people have more awareness of it. It's a matter of, it's a balance, because some things are sport issues only. In other words, you take away the sport, they're fine.
Right.
And some other things are just maybe, and maybe to another extent, you could argue that sport has triggered some of those feelings that's carried over into other areas of their life. But that's a two-way street. It could be from
Vice versa.
ordinary life into sport, or it can be sport into life.
Absolutely.
So I need to recognize that. As far as I'm concerned, I think mental health support is very important, because you need somebody to tell you that you're okay or you're not okay, or what you need or what you can do to take care of yourself better mentally. I also believe that in some circumstances, the mental health line gets crossed between the coaching, aspect and between the mental health aspect. Sometimes an athlete starts to depend on the mental health person who's not necessarily involved in the sport to understand it, to the extent that the mental health can actually interfere with the athlete and therefore the athlete's performance. But in another sense, a coach may not recognize that the mental health issues that the person has does need somebody to go in this. So it's like almost like a case by case situation, and you try to use your best judgment. But when it comes into the part where the mental health person is saying things that's detrimental to the athlete in the sport, or the coach is saying things where it's detrimental to the mental health professional helping them, that becomes a separate issue. And I don't know how that's going to get addressed or resolved, but it's something that would, and I'm not saying that it comes up all the time. I'm saying that's a possibility that exists. And when that does exist, what system is in place to address that? What protocols should either side take? Because if both sides are interested in the well-being and welfare of that athlete, there's got to be at some point where there's an agreement, or the lines where the athlete steps over to the coaching side, then steps over to the mental health side. There's got to be some way in which those parties can come together to work together to make that athlete successful.
Absolutely.
Mentally and otherwise.
Absolutely. You said a word there, which is actually a word that came to my mind when you were talking, was alliance. Because I know from working in this field over the years that one of the reasons that there's such a wall sometimes around, or like a bubble around the athletes, especially if you're talking about professional athletes, is because there's that fear from the coaching side and from like the performance team as it relates to athletic trainers and such, that something is going to get introduced here, whether it's a thought, an idea, or even the treatment itself, that's going to get in the way of what they're trying to do or contradict what they're trying to do from the coaching side. So one thing I want to say is, first of all, that's not our role. That's not what's supposed to be happening. There is something that can happen. I think this can happen also with coaching too, but we talk about it in mental health, and it gets in the way of the therapeutic relationship that we have with patients. But where people over-identify with the person that they're helping. And I think that recognizing the importance of the roles of each person in the team is key for this, but also recognizing that, just like when you're talking about Adam, he had his career, you have yours. This person has their career, their life going on. And no matter how much you might feel like, oh, I went through the same thing, or this is similar, this is still their life and career. So we can't insert ourselves to the point where we feel like kind of possessive over it, or feel like our way is the only way.
Right.
So my question to you, though, from the coach's side, because I agree, there should be an alliance, and we need to find a way to make these two sides of the team work together, because that's in the best interest of the athlete.
And also, there's a recognition that there's some medical things that may come up. That just from the point of as a professional mental health person, you're not at liberty to say. And like, I respect that and appreciate that. But what I'm talking about is that when the lines get crossed over, because a coach cannot cross over into an athlete's mental health and give them advice there.
Right.
But at the same time, a medical person cannot cross over and give them coaching advice that is counterculture to what's needed for the athlete. Now, the way that you present a message and the way that you say things can be something that you can address, but I think you're quite right. at some level, an alliance is needed, because you can't be in the middle sentence and go, oh, wait, no, the mental health person has to talk about that. Let's talk about something else. And now the
Right.
athlete's left confused.
What do you see from a coach's standpoint, if you've ever experienced or heard of situations where the mental health professional did cross that line? What are there any pet peeves, if you will, about that, or any tools or tips that you would recommend for people who are working with athletes or want to work with athletes so
Well,
they're not creating that situation?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that should best happen is that the mental health person should at least get the permission of the athlete to be able to contact the coach and say, hey, listen, I'm working on this athlete and they have these, these issues. You don't have to give details or tell they have some issues. Or, so some of it may cross over into your boundaries. What things do I need to be aware of, or what is it that I can do to make sure that I don't impact the athlete in this area of their life that they've chosen that they're doing well in?
Okay.
Because at least by doing that, the coach is aware, and if it does happen that they say something that crosses over, the one thing is the coach is aware that the person talked to you, so you're going to recognize and realize he or she is not doing this intentionally. They're doing it
Yeah.
in order to help, protect, strengthen, or enable the athlete to be successful.
Okay.
That's one of the things. If the athlete doesn't give that permission, then it is what. Then you're at the stalemate. One of the things you don't want is the coach telling you, "Hey, we need you to be intense. You need to be excited for this." And then the mental health coach says, "No, you just need to be calm. The next few days, you need to be taking it easy. You don't need to." And so could be a star player and have taken themselves out of the game because of the. And so some understanding is if it's so important for the athlete, then that conversation ought to be had with the coach, because the coach, unbeknownst to him and what's been said, we really need you. We've got to have you. So now where's the pressure goes? All the stress it goes on the athlete. Because you've both given two different messages. At this stage in your career, in your life, with everything going on, you need to take a step back and just be able to breathe and give yourself some time. You don't want to be overwhelmed by the stress of everything, of it all. Meanwhile, the coach is like, we really need you. You are the person that can, you're the game changer. You're the difference maker in this, what we're about to do. So we need you at your top, ready to go. Are you ready to go? And, there's the pressure of that. So, but if the conversation is had, then they say, all right, like a friend of mine, as a coach, he says, sometimes you can see an athlete heading towards rock bottom. And I said, well, what do you do when that happens? He said, well, they've got to crash in order for them to be repaired. Because otherwise it's like a wounded animal. They're still going, but they're wounded. Well, you need to just make them whole. They've crashed, fix them, get them back on their feet, and build them back up, and let them fly again, so to speak. So that's kind of in that realm of where this is.
You mentioned the pressure that obviously when you're at a high level of sport, there's a lot of pressure. Do you have some like go-to techniques for managing stress and pressure?
I do.
Okay.
But you try to remind the person is that this is the moment you've been preparing yourself for. And this is the moment I've been preparing myself for, that you're in this situation and I'm here to help you achieve or to adjust to these set of circumstances. And so, we talk about that. And they said, well, in this situation, I said, usually in the most highly intense, stressful situation, the best thing you can do is take a deep breath and just be you. Because being you, it means that you're now aware of things and you can make a decision that's in the best interest for yourself or for your team if you're in a team sport. I said, but the one thing you don't want to do is be in a high pressure situation and think you're at the high pressure. Maybe your presence is causing high pressure for the other side. And if that's the case, then you don't have to worry. You just need to do what you need to do. If you're ranked the top person or you're ranked the favorite, then all eyes are on you. All you have to do is just do what you normally do. Everyone else will have to cope. If they're the high ranking person and you're going into that situation, you can't change their outcome by being intimidated by them, but you can change their outcome by not being intimidated and do what you do best. And wherever that lands you, it lands you. And sometimes you can surprise people. When you're all so clustered together and you're so close, that means anyone's race. Then you have a choice, right? Then you have a choice. No matter how good they are, you're right there with them because you're in the funds with them. So you give yourself a chance, and just give yourself a chance, and just make the effort that you're capable of. No, as long as you've done that, you can hold your head up high. As long as you went in there and you gave the best that you can on that day. What does it matter? There's only a handful of people are at this level at this moment in time that are here.
Yeah.
And so that allows you the freedom to express yourself however you choose to. Now, if you're too nervous and it doesn't work, and you're too nervous, then do the best that you can within that nervousness. What's the bottom line of what you think you can do when you're nervous? X. And try to be X.
I love that, because no matter if you're at the top and you're trying to stay there, or if you're an underdog and you're trying to move up, the key to the success is just doing you.
Yes.
And focusing on yourself and your performance,
Mhm.
and not being pushed and swayed.
And the external stuff is going to be there no matter what, because every time you go into competition, the external stuff is always there.
Yeah.
You can choose to ignore it, or you can choose to embrace it, or you can choose to not let it have an impact on you. You know, but either way, no matter what you do, that is going to be there.
Yeah.
You know, it's what you decide to do. On I remember an athlete being in the Olympics, going. Actually, this is actually even better than that. There was a young man that I coached at Stanford, and he's a doctor now. His name is Dr. Michael Robertson. I hope he forgives me for this. But anyway, so he's
what's about to happen?
Yeah, he's about. So we're at the World Championship trials, or one of those trials, or U.S. National Championships. That's what it was, U.S. National Championships. Okay. And at that time, finished second NCAAs. He was getting ready for the next try and make the U.S. team. At the time, they had these two world-class athletes, Ian Waltz and Jared Rum, who had thrown like 222 or 223. This far away. He, meanwhile, is at 210. I'm preparing him for the championships. I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. And in the training, we're going to train here, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So we do all those training, do all those things, and his throws start to come up, his performances start to get up and better. So I know he's performing well, because I know what the training is doing, because I could see it with him, and I could see, I had a visual of his performance. So in any case, he's going up against these guys, but he doesn't know he's going up against these guys, because they're all in the same competition. So in his mind, those guys are out of sight. So we get to the venue, and it's raining in the first half of the event. All those guys have thrown well in great conditions, nice, lovely. It's raining, so now that brings everything down a level, except for the way he's throwing. He's actually up, but I don't actually tell him that, because I knew what it was with him. So he warms up and he takes a throw, he takes another throw, and he flubs them. His last throw, he throws a paltry distance, and he was in the first flight. The second flight had all of the big heavy hitters.
Okay.
The conditions got to them. All right, but there was an indication of something good to come from him in the first flight, when he had thrown a long throw, and it went, and he just took it out of the sector line. It just came out of the sector line. But anyway, so in the second flight, one of those guys who was supposed to be in the finals, which had ruled him out, did not make it the finals. He had 3 fouls, and he slipped on his third throw, and he didn't make it. So Michael, having won the longest throw in the first flight, was now in the finals. And I remember the head coach coming to me and says, he's in the finals, and I'll go to say a word to Michael, and he goes like this. He pushes me away, with like that was his expression, that I'm fine.
Yes.
So the head coach turned to me and says, well, aren't you going to coach him? I said, no. He said, well, why not? I said, he's told me he doesn't need me. He said, well, where are you going? He said, I'm going to get a sandwich and a Coke and a smile. He said, you're here to coach him. You should coach him. I said, okay, right, I'll coach him. And I just look out the window and say, I'll coach him. Everything good. Michael takes his first throw, and he moves from like 8th place up to 5th place.
Wow.
Right? Not bad. He's in front. In the next round, because in the finals you get 3 throws. Next round, in the 5th round, so in the 5th of 6 rounds, his next round he throws 210, right? Which puts him in first place. He's ahead of the other 2 guys that had thrown the 223 earlier.
Yes.
So now the pressure is on them, and he's the underdog. So they're under pressure. They flub him, and as a result of that, he wins and becomes U.S. national champion.
Oh my goodness.
Breaks the school record in as well as doing that.
Wow.
So, when you talk about mental health, and you talk about preparation, and you talk about coaching, and you talk about the athletes, and you talk about their relationships, all of those things came together in that one moment for me at that time. And I always talk about mental health now, because the mental health I talk about, it comes up, is that you realize now that how mentally strong he had to have been to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, with all those factors, I mean, it's easy to get intimidated, especially if you knew that they were there and knew how well they normally do, knew how well they were doing before the rain got so bad. And I've said before, not today, but in the past, you can't outcompete your own self image.
No.
And if he felt that he could not surpass those people because of who they were and how they normally do, he wouldn't have
Mhm.
won. But
No.
because he focused on himself and was like, I got this. And however he mentally was able to get past the circumstances of the rain, he was able to stick it out. He didn't need the perfect conditions. He didn't need lesser
Yeah.
competition. He just did him and then he won.
He got,
Yeah.
and I'll say this: he got this because the confidence that he had was turned around after NCAA's knowing the U.S. National Championships was there,
Mm,
but the confidence turned around by him. I just
yeah.
helped him. Like, if you do this, I gave him information, but the information I was giving him was working. His
Hmm.
level of confidence got higher and higher and higher. So he went into the meet not wondering if he was going to do well, but wondering how well he was going to do.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank you for all of these stories. Right now, I had all these other questions, but you've talked about them already. So the last thing that I want to ask you about, this is
Yeah.
what's good with Dr. Wilson moment. So if there's anything that you'd like to highlight, and of course also any final like points you'd like to make, but anything that you have going on you'd like people to know about, anything at all that you want to share, projects or anything, let our listeners know.
Well, the only thing I would tell you is that I'm a granddad now.
I saw the picture.
Yeah, I'll
Love
tell
it.
you. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But I would
Mhm.
defer to you for final comments for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is I'm so humbled by the fact that you would invite me um, to be part of something like this. That's number one. I recognize there's some things I've done in my life that some others haven't done. I understand that. But more importantly, I think one of the things has been the relationships you have with the people that you work with, the relationship you have with the people you coach, the
Mhm.
relationships you have with the people that you don't work with or you don't even coach.
Mhm.
Our relationship came about as an interest in helping you, just out of being interested. I thought, what a nice person. And every time I saw you, you'd smile and you'd say hello. And I just thought, wow. And the advice I gave, I hoped really helped. But you did say that I told you one piece
You
of
did.
advice that you've never forgotten. And it's still true today.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah,
You did.
it's still true today. I mean, I think more than anything else is I'm eternally grateful for my experience at Stanford, but I'm also eternally grateful for people like you. It is the interactions and the relationships I have with the athletes, right or wrong, good or bad, whatever, that's helped shape me into being able to be a coach and to continue to coach. And and for that I'm very grateful. I mean, like, you're meeting young people. I'm meeting young people who I think it's a pleasure. You're watching them go through their life, and you're seeing the developments, and you're seeing the growth, things that you couldn't see as yourself when you're a much younger coach that you can
Mhm.
see now, and it's just exciting. It's fun. I think the most wonderful part of that for me, more than anything else, is watching the success transition from sport into real life, and you are the epitome of that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
You're very
that.
welcome.
Well, you know what I wanted to tell you earlier in the conversation when you were talking about some of these issues that come up with athletes, but also just the many athletes that you have helped, and you're just like, what did I do? And one thing that I didn't ask you, but I'm going to answer it for the athletes. I was going to ask you about when that discernment, the discernment like what you had to pick the right people to follow, to pick the right people to work with, to pick the right people to inspire you and figure things out for yourself on your way. Some people
Hmm.
have a gift of discernment, some people don't. But I do think that because the athlete coach relationship is so special, whether you work directly with them or not, everyone that's a part of the team has an impact. And that isn't even just in high school or college or professional. Everyone that's part of the team has an impact. But for people to understand, how do I know who are those people that I can trust? How do I know who
Hmm.
are the people who have my best interests and who really want to see me go farther and do better and be a part of this journey?
Hmm.
And with everything that you've shared today, I think it's important for anyone who would see this to understand that even if you can't see it because it is a gift and it's just who you are, this is the blueprint. You are the blueprint for
Well,
recognize.
that's
I'm
great.
not kidding. I'm not just saying this to be nice. It's true. Because as you know, I know, it's not everybody. There's some lessons that, I mean, life just teaches some lessons the hard way. But I think that if anybody hasn't had somebody in their life who's poured into them or who supported them and who gets the joy just from doing that as opposed to a handout to hopefully collect somehow on their success, and they don't know how to recognize that because they haven't seen it. I hope that they see this. I hope that they listen to what you've shared, listened about the people that you've helped along the way, and how far out from their athletic career that you're still a part of their life. And I hope that that resonates with them so that they can start to recognize that in the people who are like that in their lives right now. And I thank you for being one of those people.
You're very kind. I'm quite touched by that actually, because I just think of it as something you do every day. It's just part of something I think I should be. I don't think I try to do anything extraordinary. I just try to do the ordinary things every day, and that kind of consistency. I also like to have a laugh and have fun, and that could
Yes.
be part of it too. I pull the athletes' legs all the time, and they just give me a hard time too. So it's fun. It's all in good fun. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I appreciate that. I can only tell you that I try, because in my career, um, and in my experience, it's
Mhm.
always been best if you give somebody a hand forward, because you never know, as they go forward, they can help everything go forward and better for not only themselves but for the people around them. So
That's right.
I
That's
choose to
right.
be part of the solution rather than the problem.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for
You're
being
very,
here.
very welcome. Thank you again for having me on.